To become a household name as a runner, you have to do something extraordinary. I don't mean just winning a gold medal, setting a world record, or even doing both of those things at once. There's a bit more to it than that. In order to truly set yourself apart from the rest, you need to not only redefine your event, but to do it in such a way that redefines and uncaps the limit on the human race as a whole. It sounds pretentious, but sounding like something is one thing, seeing it actually unfold though, is a whole other one. This is the story of an athlete that seemed like he would have a well-defined and established legacy to leave behind within their sport alone, but the degree in which he pushed those notions will now be remembered by the entire world as the man to, frankly, do it all. This is the story of Eliud Kipchoge. Born in the Rift Valley province of Kenya, Kipchoge's athletic origins fall into a somewhat familiar story that some may have heard before. Supposedly running to school and back home most days, these 3-kilometer trips eventually culminated into a competitive interest in the sport of athletics. And coincidentally so, his future coach and neighbor would be a fantastic first mentor to guide him in the right direction. This man was Patrick Sang, who wasn't just a familiar face to Kipchoge, but was also an Olympic silver and double world championship silver medalist in the 3,000-meter steeplechase back in the 1990s. While Kipchoge had dabbled in cross-country in 2001, Sang wouldn't officially start coaching him until 2002, where the Kenyan teenager actually won his country's junior trials, qualifying for the World Cross-Country Championships all the way out in Dublin, Ireland. For his first ever international race, Kipchoge showed a lot of promise staying with the top pack as far as 3/4 in, but this quintet of East African prodigies would split apart shortly after. Even though Kipchoge would be at the back of the pack by the end, a top 5 finish was a phenomenal debut for someone who had really just started serious training. Once he transitioned to the track, he would best his peers at the Kenyan Junior Championships running 13:32, but a month later, had dropped his personal best by about 18 seconds at a meet in Italy. By September that year, he entered his first ever professional league race in Berlin, where the elite field may have been a little too brisk for his liking, but still hung in to run his fastest time yet again. 2003 was where Coach Sang and Kipchoge's chemistry really started to formulate into a breakout season for Kipchoge, as in March his junior win at the World Cross Country Championships was only the very beginning of what would be a complete overhaul in his aerobic engine. He returned back to the same meet in Italy where he'd shave a couple seconds off his 5,000-meter personal best, but just 3 weeks later, had shocked the distance running world and the professional scene where he'd end up running this time.
Kipchoge, look at the rest of the field close on him as he went out too hard. Beckley trying to hold off Kipchoge. What a finish! And it is Beckley getting the finish at the tape with a victory. 54.6 seconds for the last. In the third place guy set the world junior record, and I'm talking about Kipchoge. Just 19 years of age is Kipchoge, and he was right behind these guys. It is preposterous to think that college athletes in America can run this fast.
This 12:52 in Oslo had way more going for it than people realized. He would finish third just behind a sub-27 10K guy, and the other one he just barely lost to was the senior world cross-country champion, and on top of that, had now possessed the junior world record in the 5,000. Kipchoge further got his foot in the door by placing 4th at another stacked meet in Paris, and qualified for the World Championships at just 18 years old. Making the finals at an event like this was a surreal enough feeling to have this early in his career, but what he would do in these finals was such a defining moment for him that it would ultimately change the trajectory of his life forever.
Title, Kipchoge, the world junior record holder, still there. Bekele, the 10,000-meter gold medalist, still there. John Kibon trying to get onto them. Garouge has run his race, or has he? Has he got anything left? El Garouge trying to get there. Kipchoge, the junior's there. El Garouge is trying to get to the line. Kenya wins it. Kipchoge takes the gold medal.
Sensational race. 12 minutes, 52 seconds plus. And they left it for the sprint. And Kenya has come away with 2 important gold medals here to help salvage a disappointing world championships for them.
As just a teenager, Eliud Kipchoge became a world champion, defeating one of the most stacked fields the event had ever seen. One was Kenenisa Bekele, who again was the world cross-country champion, but then he outsprinted the mile and 1500 meter world record holder and world champion Hicham El Guerrouj as well. This win was honestly one of the biggest upsets in the sport's history, and was a Cinderella chapter that would officially kickstart Kipchoge's legacy as an endurance phenom. As we enter the Olympic year that will be Athens 2004 though, would we see the Kenyan become an Olympic champion at 19? Or would his competition force the prodigy to play catch-up as they push the boundaries of the sport further and further? Kipchoge's 2004 season starts off yet again with the World Cross Country Championships, but this time with the big dogs. The 12K course was Kipchoge's longest race by far, but the lengthy dirt and grass course was far from a deterrent, as he stayed on the shoulders of the multi-world champion Bekele for over 20 minutes of the race. Once the 7K mark rolled around, a trio of Ethiopians banded together to pull away and push the race to another level. This left Kipchoge in no man's land very quickly, but he would still manage to pull out a 4th place finish, successfully fending the rest of the field off. Compared to last year though, Bekele had evolved into a whole other beast by this point, breaking the 5,000 and 10,000 meter records, and El Guerrouj very likely had that chip on his shoulder to claim what he believed to be his title. A lot of people might have known who the top 3 would likely be, but honestly no one knew what the outcome would be this time around.
Hicham est juste derrière Bekele qui commence maintenant à lancer son sprint. Hicham El Guerrouj va essayer tout de suite de répondre. Kipchoge refuse de se laisser passer. Hicham El Guerrouj à l'entrée du virage. Attention à Kipchoge à la corde. Oh, c'est superbe, c'est superbe. Kedili, ça résiste. Hicham est gros. Hicham est d'un seul remporter le 1500 et le 5000.
Et vous savez ce qui va se passer là bientôt? Non, je vais vous le dire, le roi du Maroc va l'appeler à nouveau.
Oui, je pense qu'il va avoir dans quelques instants.
While Kipchoge tried to stubbornly fend off 2 of the greatest distance runners to ever touch the sport, it would ultimately not be enough to defend his title in the 5,000. He would still finish in 3rd place, securing his first ever Olympic medal for his Olympic debut. El Guerrouj, the winner, would retire right after this race, leaving Ethiopia and Kenya to duke it out for the next few years. This has historically been a very common rivalry, but now Kipchoge's rival was someone who at this point could frankly be a contender for the greatest distance runner of all time. If he were to win a gold medal now, it wouldn't just mean he was the best runner on that day, or even that year, it would prove that this version of Bekele was mortal, and that task was going to be the toughest one to take on by far. The 2005 season reignited the feud pretty fast, as Bekele and Kipchoge would meet yet again for another cross-country showdown in France. Up until the last lap of the course, which was nearly 30 minutes in, Kipchoge had maintained form and had even threatened to take the lead at some points. However, as soon as they had entered the final lap, Bekele's stride opened and Kipchoge had no response, eventually falling back a few spots and placing 5th overall. While it seemed like he had gotten his groove back by track season with some solid 3,000 meter times, he had surprisingly placed out of the top 3 at the trials, which would likely mean he wouldn't be present at the World Championships. However, because he was the reigning world champion from 2003, he was granted a bye, which meant that he had an automatic entry into the 5,000 meter final. Well, he technically had to qualify through the first round still, but he certainly had a fantastic chance at defending his world championship title.
Dans le virage, en a-t-il les moyens?
Oh, ça va être très très chaud, d'autant qu'il y a Benjamin Limo. Voilà Benjamin Limo qui essaye de faire une Pascal Thiébaut en prenant la petite porte, mais c'est Siné qui relance maintenant l'Éthiopien Motram derrière. Croquet, Siné, vont-ils y arriver? C'est Limo, je crois, qui va passer.
Oh, si c'est lui, ça super.
Et ouais, c'est lui, Siné échoue.
C'est peut-être son goc, non?
Ou peut-être son coq, oui, son coq.
La course de Motram aussi.
Et vous voyez que le champion du monde en titre, Eliud Kipchoge, est 4e et Aïs Aïdissieff, l'Algérien, fait un...
While Kipchoge made a promising move with about 150 to go, it would actually be a different Kenyan to take the title from him, as his teammate, Benjamin Limo, stormed to the front with less than 100 meters, and Kipchoge would sadly be caught right at the end by a couple people to miss out on a medal entirely. The quality of distance running fields seemed to be only getting better, and Kipchoge's improvement rate, on the other hand, had seemed to show signs of stagnation, if anything. Perhaps he was just off on that day, but things didn't look as glamorous for him as they had a couple years back. Nevertheless, it was time to regroup, repair, and to use the non-outdoor championship year to properly gear up for his next big showdown. The 2006 season showed a couple signs of a comeback story, but Kipchoge seemed to fall back a couple steps as the months went on. He managed to secure a bronze medal in the 3000 at the World Indoor Championships, but his ability to close out races had almost seemed like it had disappeared, being bested in every 5,000-meter race he entered, and had pulled out of the World Athletics final in the event after a disappointing 7th-place finish in the 3000. In 2007, a slightly more refreshed Kipchoge came back swinging, running a solid 26:49 10,000-meter race for his debut in the event, and this time around placed within the top 3 at the Kenyan trials to properly make the team. At these World Championships this time around, the race was substantially more reserved than previous iterations, running over 70-second laps at some points, which effectively meant this was going to come down to a blistering kick unlike any other Championship 5000 Kipchoge had ever seen in his career by far. This was slightly worrying because we had not seen him outsprint anyone at the line since that day in 2003. If there was a time to summon it though, it would be now. And as the bell rang, and as all hell broke loose, Kipchoge did put himself in legitimate contention this time to win it all once again.
Vem de camiseta branca, vem acelerando, entrando na reta e assumindo a ponta. Vem o Bernat Lagat dos Estados Unidos para conquistar a medalha de ouro, a segunda dele no Mundial. Campeão nos 1.500 e vai ser campeão dos 5.000 metros no Mundial em Osaka.
Na competição, não adianta reclamar, na competição de atletismo, mesmo que seja um ato involuntário, e os atletas têm que duas coisas.
While the redemption for gold was taken right out of Kipchoge's hands at the line by USA's Bernard Lagat, this silver for Kipchoge meant that he was back and ready to take on the best, and that his end race speed was more refined than ever, because when next year around the corner, he would likely be flying over to Beijing for the Olympics and will try to upgrade his bronze to something much more memorable and reflective of his true athletic potential. After placing top 3 in the trials yet again handily, he would meet Bekele at a championship final for the first time since Athens 2004. Bekele did have a full 10,000-meter final under him a few days prior, so for Kipchoge, this was likely the best chance for him to take the sting out of a kick from a man who seemed invincible, and to add an Olympic gold to his resume that he felt like he should have had 4 years back.
Soy comes under pressure. Eliud Kipchoge is trying to stay in contention, but Kenenisa Bekele is sprinting. He desperately wants this title to win the gold. It's all over for the rest of the field as Kenenisa Bekele. He takes the double. Kenenisa Bekele and a new Olympic record. He was just unbeatable. It didn't matter what was going to happen there. He made it hard, he made it tough. He ran the finish out of first.
Kipchoge would not be able to keep up with Bekele's absurd last 400, but he was now a double Olympic medalist, upping the ante from a bronze to a silver now. The consistency was there once again, but now it was time to sharpen the tools for one more cycle. He had to move up one more step to a gold medal to complete the triple medal hat trick on the highest note possible. Kipchoge's next couple years had some reasonably high highs, but was paired with some harsh lows as well. 2009 was an average year for him all things considered, as his placements throughout races were fine, but would not secure a medal at the World Championships, placing 5th. 2010 showed even more signs of stagnation, as while his 12:51 5K win in Doha was a solid season opener to run in May, his following performances were the worst he had ever seen in his career, placing out of the top 10 at a couple Diamond League tier meets, but regained some ground in the following ones, putting up a much more promising fight, but certainly wasn't mustering up any wins. Next year, he showed a bit less weakness and qualified for the World Championships again, but was outkicked and did not obtain a medal. And finally, for the 2012 Olympics, the ones that he had been training day and night for the last 4 years, he wouldn't even get to make it to the stage, as a 7th place finish at the Kenyan trials would mean he would not get to represent his country for the first time at the international stage since Athens 2004. It was eventually revealed that he had a hamstring injury leading up to this race. He also tried a few weeks earlier at the pre-classic, which did function as the Kenyan trials for the 10,000, but placed 7th in that as well. The precedent Kipchoge set back in 2003 was a marvelous one to witness, and everyone thought he could have been one of the most decorated track athletes the sport had ever seen. However, ever since that day in Paris, he had essentially plateaued, perhaps fell backwards a smidge too, and was stuck in this constant loop of fringe medal positions where he'd actually lose out on a medal more often than not, being outkicked by either Bekele or the new generation of up-and-coming 5,000, 10,000 meter specialists. The reality was that something needed to change, but perhaps this change didn't involve a pivot towards a different event on the track, but rather to make the switch towards an entirely different surface. Maybe it was time to hit the roads.
Just smooth. It's just beautiful to watch.
Up until this point, Kipchoge had dabbled in road races as far back as 2005, almost exclusively doing the 10K distance. But in late 2012, after not qualifying for the Olympics, he would test the waters in a discipline over double the length, debuting in the half marathon at a race in France. Running 59.25 and finishing in third was a pretty sound start for him, and he would place sixth at the World Half Marathon Championships just a month later. By next year, Kipchoge would open his season by ditching indoor track entirely and would run yet another half marathon, winning his first race in the discipline with a time just over an hour. 2 months later, though, he figured the half marathon still wasn't quite fulfilling. Why not try a full marathon at that point to at least get a sense of how he'd fare in the distance and to see if there was any more enjoyment or potential to be found in the 26.2 mile journey? The result?
Es wird jetzt noch eine ganze Weile dauern.
Participating, and as always, Kenyans came out tops there. Number one was Eliud Kipchoge, who finished in first position in 2 hours, 5 minutes and 30 seconds.
Pretty damn good, apparently. 2:05:30 was not only an insane time in general for the marathon, but was one of the fastest debuts the event had ever seen. On top of that, he destroyed his competition by over 2 minutes. It seemed like in just a matter of a few months, Kipchoge had found his footing once again after what seemed to be years of unfulfillment. But this had more potential than ever. After a couple more half marathons, one of which he won, he would compete at the Berlin Marathon for his sophomore showing. Over the years, this course has shown to be incredibly quick, partially due to its favorable climate, but also because the course was nearly a pancake in terms of elevation. If Kipchoge could run a mid-205 on his debut, on what seemed to be a suboptimal course for time trialing, then just exactly what could he do if he were put on the fastest marathon course in the world?
Hinten Äthiopier, der ganz letzte Läufer, da hat man dann schon ein bisschen den Eindruck, dass er mit etwas mehr Aufwand läuft und
Distanz, das ist wirklich eine brillante Vorstellung hier in der Spitzengruppe. Und es ist eben nicht, da schau mal, das ist doch der Move von Wilson Kipsang, aber an der Verpflegungsstelle. Kommen wir gleich wieder zurück bei Kilometer 35 und gehen jetzt zu Alex Bommes und dem Sieger der Rollstuhlfahrer. Wilson Kipsang gewinnt den Weltrekord 2:03 von Eliud Kipchoge. Wir haben es gesagt, Bestzeit wird das für den Mann. Super Rennen.
Unglaubliche Ergebnisse in Berlin. Ja, Berlin ist Magic.
Eliud Kipchoge was now the 4th fastest marathoner to ever live on just his 2nd marathon ever. Wilson Kipsang would break the world record in the same race, but the fact that Kipchoge was able to put up a fight for the first 35 kilometers was a phenomenal display of raw talent that 100% cemented him now as a potential threat for any major marathon he enters. The biggest question at this point now, though, was, would he continue to improve and establish his presence on the roads and to be locked and ready by the 2016 Olympics? Or would we see a resemblance of his track days where he started at the top, but fizzled out over the years to where we wouldn't see him on a podium or a promising finish ever again? Since Kipchoge had transitioned to the roads full-time, this meant that his racing schedule would be much more sparse, likely only racing 3 or 4 times a year max. In 2014, he won the Barcelona half marathon again, but his marathon season opener would take place in Rotterdam. He would confidently win this by well over a minute, making this his 2nd one over the distance. But nothing compared to what the Chicago Marathon would bring, because a familiar face had also just started to pivot to the roads, and he was looking just as strong as any other in the event already. That's right, Bekele was back.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 2014 Bank of America Chicago Marathon Elite Field.
For Chicago 2014, you had a few heavy hitters that would make this a tougher one than usual for Kipchoge to win. You had Sammy Kadwara, who ran 2:05.16 on this course the year before, Dixon Chumba, who had a couple 2:05s under his belt, Bernard Koech, who ran sub 2:05 in Dubai for his debut in 2013, and lastly, Kenenisa Bekele, who earlier this year ran 2:05.04 in Paris, ready to meet his track rival for a refined and lengthier rendezvous. The pacers for this race are actually out pretty fast, as a 14:43 5K and a 29:30 10K puts a healthy group of runners at 2:04.29 pace. By the halfway point, it's still a massive congregation of East African talent, and a 1:02.11 still puts them healthily in the 2:04 zone. It's not until after 30K where we see the group split up, and it's actually where Bekele starts to detach from who would now be the remaining trio, Kadwara, Koech, and Kipchoge. After a bit more battling between the three, the broadcast does cut away for a little while, but when it does come back, all of a sudden it seemed like Kipchoge must have delivered a brutal blow to his two compatriots with how far his lead was now. With no one in sight, Kipchoge rushes around the turn, smiles at the crowd as he comes down the home stretch, and becomes your 2014 Chicago Marathon champion.
Amazing race run today by Eliud Kipchoge of Kenya.
2:04.12 unofficially, the winning time.
Just 7 seconds off his personal best, but what a day he had.
Looks like Sammy Kadwara is holding on for second place.
This marathon win was a bit different than anything else he had done on the roads up until this point, not just because of the competition, but also because this was his first marathon major title he had under his belt too. In short, there are 6 marathons under the World Marathon Majors group, and they're typically considered to be the venues to race at if you want to snag some nice little prize money, and of course want to race against the very best. The ones to look out for are Boston, London, Berlin, Chicago, New York, and Tokyo, 2 of which Kipchoge has done already, and 1 of which he's won now. In 2015, Kipchoge's marathon season opener would take place at a major this time around, but would instead be in London. Chicago was an impressive win, but now he had to go up against the former world record holder and the current world record holder, Dennis Kimeto from Kenya, who had just become the first man to go under 2:03 in Berlin, a time an entire minute faster than Kipchoge's personal best. This race was much more catered towards the former and current world record titans, as through 10K, the pace was set for a mid-low 2:03 type of deal. By halfway, however, it does quickly simmer down to a more honest 2:04 type of showdown, keeping Kipchoge comfortably within his current fitness zone. By 30K, it's a group of 6 and Kipchoge sits relaxed, and even by 35K, it's still the same athletes waiting to see which tactics will unleash soon. Eventually, the pack does string and tire out, and it now divulges to a one-on-one between Kipchoge and Wilson Kipsang. Kipsang confusingly veers off towards the opposite side of the drink stand, where Kipchoge snags a bottle, and Kipsang begrudgingly makes his way back over to Kipchoge's heels to not let him get an inch during this pivotal stage of the race, after making what seems to be a questionable and likely unintentional move. They soon embark in a classic stride-for-stride battle with about 800 meters left, but Kipchoge puts forth a similar blow to what we saw him perform in Chicago, and will now take his second marathon major against the best marathon runners he could possibly beat.
Mein Lieber, der hat was im Petto. 2:04:40, die große Zeitprämie kriegt er auch. Und ich hoffe, wir sehen uns bald wieder an dieser Stelle auf gleicher Welle bei uns bei Autosport. Bei den nächsten Marathons machen Sie es gut, liebe Zuschauer. Und
with 2 majors under his belt now, the stage was finally set for Kipchoge to fulfill his lifelong goal of pursuing an Olympic gold medal. Of course, before these games, he returned to Berlin near the end of 2015, beating a solid field and getting his 3rd marathon major win, with a nice little personal best to go along with it. In 2016, London would be his choice yet again to get a gauge for what his Olympic competition would be like, and Kipsang, Bekele, and other big names were back. To say he scared the daylights out of his competition would probably be an understatement though, because this is what he would ultimately pull out to show the world what he had in store before the Rio Olympics.
7 has passed. It's going to be the second fastest marathon we've ever seen. 2:03:05. Course record by well over a minute. Comparing performances across other performances on the same route.
It isn't a world record, but frankly, that is as good, if not better, than any marathon run we've ever seen.
A second London Marathon title, and a 2:03:05 time, this meant that Kipchoge was now the second fastest man over the distance and obliterated the course record as well. By this point, Kipchoge had won every single marathon he had entered but Berlin in 2013, meaning his record leading into these games was 6-1, his only loss being a second-place finish to a world record performance. After being selected to represent Kenya for the Rio Olympics, Kipchoge was as prepared as he possibly could be, going into this race with the fastest season best by far, and of course with an undefeated resume for the last couple years now. All he needed to do was to execute the same level of racing quality he had done up until this point, and the title was likely his. There were only so many more chances by this point where he could get an Olympic gold medal, and this was probably the best one he's had yet. Despite what 2003 said about him 13 years back, this was Kipchoge's actual turning point in his career.
Of 60,000 fans here at American Arts, and the athletes of the Olympic Games from all sports.
On August 21st, 2016, Eliud Kipchoge became an Olympic champion. After 3 tedious attempts on the track, one of which didn't even land him a spot on the team, the man from the Rift Valley province embarrassed the rest of the field in a tactical, warm, and humid race to become the undisputed best marathoner of the modern era now. Kipchoge has had a lot of short bursts in his career that would temporarily put him on the map, but this Olympic gold and his streak of wins on the roads was a resume in progress that was slowly building him up to becoming one of the all-time greats. Here's the scary part though. As cliche as this saying goes, Kipchoge was only getting started. This isn't your cliche heroic athlete arc, where they continue to dominate the sport within their era, and will only be remembered for being good during that time and nothing more. No, this was much, much different, because a few months after Kipchoge's gold in Rio, Nike, his sponsor, wanted to see what this man could actually do in the marathon. A project so experimental and expensive, and so pristinely tuned, that it would push the human body as far as it could physically go in this event. Welcome to Breaking 2.
But personally, in my heart and in my mind, I believe it's possible that I can go beyond human limitation by running under force.
Here we go!
In December of 2016, dozens of articles started pouring out about the release of Nike's marathon-based project, Breaking 2. The self-explanatory experiment invited 3 of the best distance runners in the world and would give them the resources and technology to either run a marathon in under 2 hours or to at least get as close as possible. Of course, preferably the former. The actual details of what types of science and locations would be utilized to push these athletes to new levels were to be determined, but here was your trio that would try to put promise into practice. Eritrea's Zerzane Tedesse was selected as a candidate primarily due to his perceived potential in the full marathon, despite having a lackluster personal best compared to the other 2 candidates. The biggest reason is that he's the current half-marathon world record holder, as with a time of 58:23, there's clearly a component missing in Tedesse's repertoire that's preventing him from succeeding in the full version. With Nike's help though, they plan on tapping into his full aerobic engine and could turn him into a monster in the event like he is in the half. Then there was Ethiopia's Lalisa Desisa. The 26-year-old burst onto the scene winning the Dubai and Boston marathons in 2013 and has shown other solid performances in the event despite being fairly young for the distance. While his recent times haven't emulated this caliber of dominance, the people over at Nike still see great potential in him and will be working on any and everything with him in the hopes he can threaten the sub-2 barrier. Then, of course, was Kipchoge. A single marathon loss since 2013, second fastest marathon of all time, the current Olympic champion. Is there really much more to say? With a seemingly non-existent cap to his skill ceiling at the moment, the Nike team will be ecstatic to work with him, and will be immensely curious what he can do when the stars are aligned. After the news broke, running fans across the world were met with both excitement and, understandably, a good degree of skepticism. I mean, breaking 2 hours would require about a 2.5% drop in time from the current world record, which compared to time drops we've seen in recent history, would be an improvement unlike anything we'd ever seen. So, in that case, how the hell does a multi-billion-dollar company see this time and think, I mean, yeah, we could probably go under the barrier? Well, here's a few factors that the company is considering. When you try to run world record tier times in the marathon, there are so many factors that line up that could take minutes upon minutes off of a time alone. For starters, you need good weather. We're talking reasonably chilly, but not too chilly so your core temperature is fine. You're also going to want minimal wind to mitigate any drag, and minimal humidity to make sure the air is as comfortably breathable as possible. Nike plans on housing the course in Italy, a country that will not only bring near optimal conditions, but is also an area that isn't too different from the time zones the Breaking 2 athletes currently train and live in, preventing as much jet lag as possible. Furthermore, the course they'll be utilizing is a Formula 1 track, which will have very little elevation changes and no sharp turns, both factors that can easily cut a few seconds off per mile. Now, these are pretty basic factors, and it honestly doesn't take a scientist to figure that these things will help. But hold on, let's go a little further. Next, they tackle the pacing. But wait, every big marathon has some pacing. What's the big deal here? In every marathon major, yes, they do have pacers, but the last pacer will drop out at some point, mainly after around 30K, leaving a fellow competitor in either no man's land, or in other cases competing against opponents where the pace is constantly deviating due to the race turning into a more strategic endeavor than a raw, pristinely paced time trial. Nike will not only be providing interchangeable pacers for the entire race, but will also be surrounding Kipchoge in a unique formation to break any potential wind coming his way. Then there were the shoes. Designed with a unique type of foam, tall stack height, and other fancy schmancy tech, the 4% brand they attributed to it meant that it would increase your running economy by 4% apparently, which, for clarification, doesn't directly translate to a performance increase by that much. But don't be fooled, it's certainly meant to help. Controversially, a prototype of this was shown off during the 2015 Berlin Marathon, where upon a world record attempt, Kipchoge's new fancy shoes had both of its insoles fly out during the race, and his last few 5K splits suffered a good deal as a result. Lastly, it should be worth noting that if a world record were to be broken here, it would simply not count since athletes would be provided hydration via bikes alongside, which is another key component that can help during the race, because in ratified competitions you can only pick them up every so often at designated elite aid stations. The interchangeable pacers also make this record non-ratifiable too. Despite the criticisms and Nike's imperfect past with recent shoe technology, the team was still determined to hit every metric on the nose. Lots of tests were run among the three athletes, and in short, Kipchoge seemed to look the most fit and was the most cooperative one by a solid margin. To truly test just how things were going though, they would do a half marathon test at the Italian course 2 months out to see how well they could handle the 2:51 per kilometer pace. These were the results of that test.
They went all out. Lisa ran a 62:50-ish, which is obviously.
DeCisa struggled greatly to keep up with the sub-2-hour tempo. Tadesse broke the hour barrier, but seemed quite fatigued by the end. But Kipchoge, though, was all smiles by the end, and all fitness too, as his 59:19 looked incredibly relaxed and would confirm the team's beliefs that he was likely going to be the star of the show, and perhaps the one to crack the barrier. Since a lot of this info wasn't very public at the time, skeptics remained confident in their lack of faith for Nike and the trio to even come close to breaking the 2-hour barrier. Prolific sports scientist Ross Tucker said that Nike had the right idea with them implementing the improvement metrics we mentioned earlier, like drafting, constant hydration, course conditions, etc., but his actual confidence of a sub-2 in particular happening were essentially 0%. Or by his words, 0.1 since he doesn't like to err towards extreme beliefs. But in the end, none of that mattered to Kipchoge. This was going to be the most raw, pure form of testing his limits, and every bit of him believed he could truly do it. It was time for the final barrier of the marathon to come crumbling down.
This is incredible. as we stand by for the start.
15 seconds.
Slipped back a little bit from that 1:59.30 they were on earlier, but still predicted to go through on pace for breaking through that 2-hour barrier.
This has never happened before. This opens the door to what is truly possible.
I can't even fathom right now. Final time is 2 hours and 24 seconds.
Going through 35K, Kipchoge let the wheels fall off as the last few kilometers trickled down, but would still finish in an astonishing, one-of-a-kind mark of 2 flat 25. 26 seconds separated the humble Kenyan from history, and it proved any and all doubters that the science was there, the technology was there, but most importantly, the man to put it all together was in the flesh, likely waiting for a second opportunity to do it now. Until then though, it's back to the cutting board to up the fitness levels and to hit the conventional courses once again. Any rumors of a second attempt at a sub-2-hour marathon in the coming months were unsure at best, but if there was a theme that never seemed to change, it was Kipchoge winning everything he entered. Following his breakthrough performance in Italy, he would return to Berlin for the third time to defend his title and would successfully do so running 2:03.32. He was on pace to break the official record as far as 30K in, and even had a chance at 35K, but his stride and pace would dwindle and was primarily focused on securing the win at that point. In 2018, he returned to London for another crack at a title there, and yet again, won by a considerable amount with no one threatening to pass him at the line at all. Returning to Berlin that same year, the pacemaking was a bit different this time around. They had one group of pacers set to come around halfway in 61:30, which would already be good enough to break the world record. However, they decided to give Kipchoge his own group of pacers on top of that, where they would try to get him through the half in 61 minutes flat, meaning he was likely intending to go under 2:02. The conditions looked solid leading up, and Kipchoge was outright in the best shape of his life. The pace was going to be unrelenting from the start, so it was time to see what he could do on an official course with the right type of pacing, and to see if he could finally come home with an official record.
That may not sound like much as they go through the half marathon there in 61:06 unofficially. Yeah, 61:06 officially. Waiting for that mark to be confirmed. 1:26.45. And at 30K, here almost. A tunnel of support, 34 kilometers, 1:38.11. And that, as you can see, puts him 52 seconds ahead. They hit 40K now, 1:55.32, the official time. So he is almost a minute, 57 seconds ahead of Kimetto at this stage of the race. He comes towards the line, raises a sprint on those magical legs, and at last the world record is his. How fitting is this? The Olympic champion is the world record holder. 2:01.40 unofficially there for Eliud Kipchoge. He breaks the world record by an astonishing margin.
I had a great belief that I will run a world record, but I didn't know I will run 2:01. I told you know that what I was believing translated to 2:01, and I'm happy for it.
I have a feeling you're going to want to come back to this course again.
I always say Berlin forever. I will come back next year.
Congratulations, Eliud. Thank you.
Thank you.
2:01:39 was the time that would officiate Eliud Kipchoge as the king of the marathon record. Many knew that he had a legitimate shot at the official record on a ratifiable course, but I'd imagine quite a few did not predict him doing it by this much. If he was able to run this fast on an official course, then what could he do if he was given another chance? Another opportunity to crush the 2-hour barrier once and for all, and to redefine human limits forever. No more waiting would soon be necessary. Another sub-2-hour project would rise once again, but this time with an entirely different team and a whole other approach to ensuring Kipchoge would do it 100% guaranteed.
One thing that I've learned from Eliud is that when he says something, his focus is ready for that.
What on earth is going through the mind of Eliud Kipchoge?
The INEOS 159 project was announced shortly after Kipchoge's 4th win at the London Marathon. The chemical company from the UK decided to take matters into their own hands with the second runaround towards the sub-2 dream, and wanted to take what Nike did, refine it to perfection, and to sprinkle in a couple things of their own. This project was also specifically centered around Kipchoge and Kipchoge only, as by this point, he was quite literally the only viable candidate who could realistically go under 2 hours. So location-wise, not too much had changed. It would still take place within a country that was relatively close to Kipchoge's time zone to minimize jet lag, and the climate would ideally land within optimal weather conditions. Course-wise, it was flat as a pancake with a nice downhill actually to start it all off, and generally had longer straightaways to work with too. Pacing-wise, INEOS would utilize 41 professional athletes as pacemakers that would rotate in and out, but instead of the diamond-like pattern Nike used to mitigate drag, INEOS ran hundreds of simulations and eventually opted for this V formation. 5 in the front for the V, and 2 in the back as well. So kind of like a Y when you combine the two. The shoes this time around also had some slight upgrades compared to the ones Kipchoge used for Breaking 2. It's a little complex to explain them all, but if you don't think Nike had a fresh new prototype on Kipchoge's feet that was better than the last iteration, then you'd be very, very mistaken. Lastly, this event would warmly welcome everyone around the world to watch in person, as Breaking 2 was very desolate and antisocial, whereas this time around, the crowds Kipchoge is known to love will be cheering him on every step of the way, and will be great motivators to witness what will hopefully be a historical day in Vienna. October 12th, 2019 was the date, and Kipchoge was set to race at 8:15 a.m. that day. This may be one of the last times, if not the last time he could attempt such a feat, and would hopefully not have to see that first digit ever turn into a 2 at any point in the race.
And we've already got crowds, especially around here at the finish, who are all expectant of history being made today.
Well, this could be the most famous Saturday run the world has ever seen, and it's all about this man. We have liftoff. Apollo Kipchoge is up and away.
The air is thicker than originally planned, but the temps are perfect and should remain as such throughout the race. The wind is barely present too, but the pacing formation will still surround Kipchoge to maintain optimal drafting. The downhill start allows everyone to ease into the sub-2 hour pace, and it's a smooth entrance into the sea of fans. INEOS 159 was in full force. The first 5K is a smidge fast, but understandable given the downhill start, but by 10 and 15K, it seems like Kipchoge isn't scared to give himself a little extra cushion and seems content with staying ahead of pace. The exact halfway split isn't available, but we can only assume it's well under an hour because by the 25K split, Kipchoge is still on board, on pace, and is just as relaxed as when he started. To make matters even more exciting, he would continue to maintain picture-perfect 5K splits for the next couple, and was now just 7 kilometers away from breaking the barrier. A point in the race where Kipchoge fell apart last time and lost well over 20 seconds trying to finish at this unforgiving, relentless tempo. As soon as everyone saw the 40K split though, and the on-target graphic showed that he was 9 seconds ahead of sub-2 hour pace, doubt and curiosity all of a sudden turned into sheer excitement with a hint of anxiety. 6 more minutes was separated between a man and his journey to unlock a new echelon in human achievement. And as the pacemakers parted ways and let Kipchoge bask in the glory that was the final straightaway, the marathon and the 2-hour barrier would change forever.
He's pointing. Come on, he says. Eliud Kipchoge has the hand of history on his shoulder. To the Final 20 seconds. Eliud Kipchoge. Whoa! On his shoulder. 140, the unofficial time.
There's his wife.
Eliud, 1:59.40, the unofficial time. The first man to run a marathon in under 2 hours. And you know, Kipchoge was right. No human is limited. And now he can celebrate.
1:59.40.2. Last time Kipchoge was a little over 20 seconds away from breaking 2 hours, but this time he was now under 20 seconds, annihilating what some people perceive to be arguably the greatest barrier broken in sports history. This clarification has been made previously, but it's worth making again. This accomplishment would be completely undersold if it were compared to Roger Bannister's sub-4-minute mile. While certainly a fantastic performance for its time and a great piece of running history, the sub-4 mile was something that was statistically bound to happen given two Swedish runners well before Bannister's era were extremely close before they got banned. But the sub-2 marathon is a lot different here, and I can't stress that enough. This is a type of mark that many people thought was either outright impossible or not statistically probable by any metric until years and years down the line, even with the abundance of technology and near optimal training knowledge we have at our disposal today. This mark is much more comparable to the half-ton or 500-kilogram deadlift, a feat of strength so historically explosive that it has only been replicated once since then, as lifts like this tower over nearly every other feat of strength ever done to this day. Kipchoge has etched his name in the humanity history books to say the least. After doing something like this, where in the world do you even go from here? Following Kipchoge's magnum opus, his preparation would be strictly focused on the upcoming 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Unfortunately, with every athletic event postponed due to reports of a pandemic in March, the International Olympic Committee would soon shut down shop for the year and would reschedule the Olympics until further notice, which would soon be revealed to be occurring the following year. Marathons were still held under stricter guidelines once a few months went by in 2020, but it seemed like this societal delay hit some athletes harder than others, as by the London Marathon, Kipchoge would lose his first race in 6 years, placing 8th and only just going under 2:07. Now, the reality was that the pandemic had nothing to do with Kipchoge's lackluster performance, but rather a self-reported ear issue where it was fully blocked during the race, proceeded to not stop at any future aid stations, and slightly tapped the brakes as the race went on. He remained confident in his fitness though, and looked at it as just a one-off type of deal, as by next year he would debut at the Enschede Marathon in France, winning in 2:04:30 and looked to be back in good form. Now, you might be wondering by this point if Kipchoge had any legitimate rivals this year that could prevent the repeat gold from happening. There were certainly a healthy bunch of athletes that could put up a fight, but if there was one thing that was going to shake things up in Tokyo, it was the weather. Suboptimal conditions in marathons are common, especially at the Olympics, but this year it was going to be pretty warm and would force a very tactical race like we saw in Rio, which to Kipchoge's credit he actually dominated. Would we simply see another masterclass in tactical marathon running, or would a new Olympic champion rise and shake things up a bit?
Medalist once more. It was never in doubt. What a man, what an achievement, and what a moment.
Eliud Kipchoge,
the greatest of all time.
Keeping his cool figuratively and literally, Kipchoge pulled away from the current best field in the world about 31 km, didn't look back, and won his second Olympic title by over a minute. There was no question at this point that Kipchoge was the greatest marathoner to ever live now, but to have this type of hardware on top of that made his accolades shine brighter than any other athlete has ever done in this discipline. The only problem was, this win now unlocked the new holy grail of athletic achievements. Kipchoge had to become the first man now to not just break 2 hours in the marathon, but to become the first man in history to possess 3 marathon Olympic golds. By this point in his career, Kipchoge was 37 years old, which is normally nearing the tail end of a professional's ability to operate within their peak fitness levels. With that in mind, none of this deterred Kipchoge as he looked to be in better form than ever somehow, returning back to the very city he won his last gold medal at, crushing the course record, and destroying the competition running 2:02:40, becoming the first man to go under 2:04 and 2:03 there. Then he returned once again to Berlin, the place that got him his first official world record, and where Kipchoge separated himself far from anyone else at the time on the all-time list. A sub 201 or just a world record in general would have been phenomenal enough, but when people saw just how abrasive the pace was, it was evident that he wasn't just going for a world record, he was actually looking to emulate his sub 2 greatness on an official course.
Olha a meia. Todas as provas que ele entrar, de ser um grande atleta. E também tem facilidade, também veio de provas mais curtas e é um cara extremamente rápido, né? Ele não é um atleta lento, é um cara rápido.
Parciais aí para você, Adalto.
Tô vendo aqui agora, Ele passou adiantado, né? 44 segundos.
Chegou! E bateu! 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 Bateu o recorde mundial! 2 horas, 1 minuto 9 segundos. É recorde mundial!
Those legs of yours and your body still feel young.
Absolutely, yes. My mind is still actually thinking wise, still moving. The body actually still absorbing the trainings and racing.
What wonderful performance, Eliud. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Coming through the half in under an hour, his stride would start to slowly dampen throughout the second half, but still kept the tempo going, and finished with a new world record of 2:01.09. Somehow, at his age, Kipchoge did not display a single shred of weakness when it came to running at his very best, and had yet again found another way to assure everyone that no one was even close to him. After years and years of running the same few courses though, Kipchoge decided it was time to mix it up, if you will. A place he had never run before and that was also a marathon major, arguably the most prolific course in the Western Hemisphere, the Boston Marathon.
My next chapter, Boston.
The Boston Marathon, the first annual of its kind to ever exist, is effectively the Olympics for New Englanders. The polarizing weather that ranges from 40 degrees and a tornado to a borderline summer afternoon, the net decline that transposes into a brutal hill section during one of the most exhausting parts of the race, it's a little out there compared to other marathon majors. It was honestly like the Olympics were being preemptively held in Boston, and was going to be a great test to see if 1, Kipchoge had been doing some hill work, and 2, if he was still just as invincible and ready to set a precedent for the 2024 Olympics. Well, this is how it ended up going.
We see a little bit of a surge here from Gabriel Gay as we're coming through Newton. John?
Well, he did miss his last water bottle.
Mission 1 accomplished here. They have gotten the king throne here for this day at least, to be able to be Kipchoge ahead of him.
They came to see him.
He is the 3rd time in a row, that was his 3rd time again for being...
The moment a notable move was made in the race, and once the hills started piling on, Kipchoge faded quickly and could not regain composure to stay within even the top 5, landing himself a 6th place finish, which would be his 2nd loss in a marathon in nearly a decade. Kipchoge cited that his training had been going fine and that he was more than prepared for the hills, but that his left leg seemed to be drawing a lot of fatigue in the back half of the race. But this loss was tough for a couple reasons. For one, it delayed his plans to tackle every marathon major by an entire year, as he will likely be spending time recovering for the Olympic season and will not be trying New York by the upcoming fall. And 2, regardless of how you interpret his words on how he felt, it still showed a slight sign of weakness to his competitors, that the new generation of marathoners could ultimately contest him on the right day, which I'd imagine Kipchoge did not want to feel during what would probably be the most important year of his career coming up. In the fall of 2023, Kipchoge actually did end up running another race, but he would once again take on Berlin to snag his 5th title, surpassing Ethiopia's Haile Gebrselasie's record of 4. In 2024, Kipchoge actually returned to Tokyo in March instead of Boston and would be the only recent fitness metric to go off of before the Paris Olympics. To everyone's surprise even further, he looked different at this race as well. On his worst days, you would see him struggle a bit at maybe 25 or 30k, but he was losing touch with the lead pack as early as 20k in this time around. Something was off, and fans of him became increasingly worried as he would finish in his lowest placement at a marathon ever.
吉普乔格出现了，2小时06分50，
不是他历史最差，
但是名次是最差。
Last year, when Kipchoge placed this low, he simply stated that his left leg wasn't feeling it that day and that he just couldn't muster up enough strength to keep up with the lead pack. This time around, it was a little more cryptic, and he just simply stated he'd go back to training. While it's quick to assume age is now becoming a factor, this would still be an unorthodox performance even by those standards, and so people began to come to their own conclusions before down the line, news like this came out. In the weeks leading up to Kipchoge's Tokyo Marathon preparation, Kelvin Kiptum of Kenya, who had shattered Kipchoge's marathon world record and was looking to be the next big thing for the scene, had tragically passed away following a fatal car crash. Kipchoge, understandably, was beyond devastated that a fellow competitor, talent, and compatriot passed away so early in his career. But what followed after was also pretty nasty. News eventually broke of Kipchoge opening up about the incessant attacks he suffered from various corners of the online world, and really the real world too, as some had believed he had ties to Kiptum's death, despite no evidence whatsoever pointing towards such a claim. The current evidence overwhelmingly suggests it was simply a car crash. As a result, Kipchoge had allegedly received death threats towards him and his family, lost a great majority of his friends, started monitoring his children more closely than ever, and while in Tokyo, had allegedly not slept for approximately 72 hours straight leading up to his race. Despite Kipchoge's 10th place finish in Tokyo, Athletics Kenya still selected him to represent the nation for the upcoming Olympics, which some viewed as a controversial decision since there were athletes said to be much more deserving of a spot that year. This was likely his final opportunity to take everything he had learned up until this point to mitigate any potential problems that could come his way, to defend his title for the 3rd time in a row, and to illustrate the gold medal hat trick that may never happen again.
The most eagerly anticipated Olympic marathon, probably of the last 2 or 3 decades.
Kipchoge looks nice. You said it. I mean, he has such great track. Yeah, I don't see Kipchoge either.
I don't think he's in that group.
For the first time ever in his career, Kipchoge simply just didn't finish. A DNF would be the label attributed to his 3rd Olympic showing, and by the legend's own words, would be the final Olympic marathon he would partake in, meaning the three-peat would be put to a halt indefinitely. Tamarat Tola from Ethiopia would finish the brutal Paris course in an Olympic record and would be the one to wear the gold medal proudly. Kipchoge cited a slight back injury as the cause of not being able to finish the race. As of this moment, the future is a little uncertain regarding what exactly he'll be doing with his marathon career. In a very recent interview, Kipchoge stated that he still intends on competing at all 6 marathon majors, as New York City is the last one he has yet to show his face at yet. And while he has competed at Boston, he has yet to acquire a title there. He'll also be 40 in about a month, which means he'll actually be able to take a shot at the Masters World Record in the event, recently set by no other than Kenenisa Bekele at the London Marathon this year. Even with this info, question marks prick the minds of Kipchoge fanatics around the world, as they may have to wait until he releases another announcement video to know where he'll race for sure. But whatever the case may be, the data, legacy, and heart are all there. Eliud Kipchoge is retiring as the greatest marathoner to ever live, and as it currently stands, no one is taking that title away from him. To become as dominant as Kipchoge did in the marathon is a perplexing feat the more and more you try to comprehend it. A distance so lengthy, delicate, and brutal all at the same time, yet this man managed to be practically invincible and did just about everything you could possibly do with it. From his explosive entrance onto the scene in 2003, to a seemingly endless streak of tragic near-podium or near-gold misses, only to regain his footing on the roads to where his true passion lied, it's quite inspiring to see what seemed like the end of his career revitalized through the lens of pivoting towards an entirely different genre of the sport, and to do it in such a way that we may never see in the next century. His official world records, his Olympic golds, and of course, his iconic sub-2-hour performance on that day in Vienna will be celebrated for decades to come. And his quiet, humble attitude towards it all give these accomplishments all the more respect they deserve as well. It's honestly hard to put into further words just how uniquely impressive Kipchoge's career as an endurance athlete really is. It's almost like it shouldn't have happened, yet here we are reveling in all of his accolades years after they happened, and we'll probably be doing the same years down the line as if he laced up on the roads that day. Even if in a literal sense, humans have some sort of limits within them, Kipchoge's words and actions, though, have shown that you likely have yet to reach them. And until you get to that point, you should continue to pursue your goals and push further than you have ever gone before. So, in the human sense, I suppose, and by Kipchoge's own accord, no human is truly limited.
They say if you are coming here for success, then good things actually is not an option. It's a necessity.